Greetings everybody, this is Sweet Beats here with Sweet Beats Tech Stop. Just a little update on the AT-RMX64. This is what reproduction on 4 tracks that you just recorded looks like. I've been grappling with an issue where the unit wouldn't record on tracks 1 and 2, and we're now firing on all 4 cylinders. This is the record amplifier PCB. I noted this in some earlier videos and some posts and some online forums. I made my own extender cables out of, you can get these breadboard jumper cables, ribbon cables. I got these on Amazon, about a foot long, 40 conductors each, male on one end, female on the other. You've got to take some pliers or something and just give a little squeeze on the plastic housings for each of these to get them to not fit too snugly at the pitch that the connector housing is on the Technica connectors. But these work just fine. So that allowed me to do some deeper troubleshooting and probing with the record card out, because I had already determined that signal was getting from all 4 of the sub modules out to the motherboard and over to the other end of the motherboard to the transport section amp cards. So can't see it all right now, but there's 3 motherboards in the AT-RMX64. There's one down the front across all of the mixer modules, and then there's a sub motherboard across the back that handles the 6 input modules, and then there's one across the back that goes under the 4 sub-modules and over to the transport section. This is the one that I was focused on. The back, almost half of the sub-modules is all Dolby circuitry. The sub-modules are almost like 2 separate PCBs that are merged into one board, but there's literally only one wire. There's a jumper wire that goes from the front section to the back section with all the Dolby circuitry, and otherwise all of the traces are completely independent. So, and then this board goes over here under the transport section. So I took the bottom panel off, flipped it up, and did some investigating there, figured out what pins were what, and isolated it that from here, the next place it goes at the output of the Dolby circuitry, the next place it goes to is track 1. So there's on the record card, there's an 8-pin connector and there's an 18-pin connector. And on pin 1 of this 18-pin connector, which I think is called connector 12 on this board, pin 1 is the input of track 1 from the output of the channel 1 Dolby circuitry. Pin 3 is track 2, pin 5 is track 3, and pin 7 is track 4. And I wasn't getting any signal on tracks 1 and 2 here. I figured it had something to do with the circuitry on the board. I know there's a couple of folks that I've been communicating with that have been having similar issues and state that they've done all the tracing and reflowed solder joints on the motherboard. My issue turned out to be bad solder joints on the motherboard. I think at some point somebody was trying to remove this record amp card, and as they were removing it, because it goes in just like that, so you have the 8-pin one over here, the 18-pin one over here, and again, if they've not been removed before and they've been in here for 30-40 years, you know, they can be pretty stubborn to get out. And these phenolic resin PCBs, the motherboards are made out of the same material, and they're quite flexible, and you have to be careful. And anyway, I have a feeling somebody tried to get it out and went rip like that, popped the 8-pin one off and torqued it this way, and it cracked and broke the solder joints to look like about the first 4 pins of the corresponding connector on the motherboard. And I'd looked at the motherboard before and I didn't identify those bad solder joints, but part of that is just because at that point I didn't know what I was looking at on the underside. It just a whole bunch of solder joints. And once I started tracing things out, following the traces and following the circuitry and doing some investigation, and I got to those, but I still didn't look too closely because it was partially covered by the foam support blocks that are under the motherboards, between the motherboards and the bottom panel, to support for when you're plugging these things in. Anyway, long story short, I didn't have signal here, and I was like, what's going on? And I kept wiggling connectors, the pins around down here, and would kind of get connectivity, and then I said, I gotta just flip this thing up and take a look. And when I did that, it was super obvious they were super broken. So I actually removed all of the solder to all 18 pins on the motherboard, cleaned it up, made sure that the connector and the sockets on the connector were good, and they were all good, and then reinserted, resoldered, and just for safekeeping, reflowed the joints on the 8-pin connector on the motherboard, and everything is working peachy now. So that doesn't mean that there isn't some other semi-common issue that's causing recording failures, and that it's something either on the record amp circuitry or maybe even back here in the Dolby circuitry. On my particular unit, it was just bad solder joints, but I think it's important to take the time to actually trace it out and follow the signal, and identify where it breaks down, and then back up from there and figure out where it fell apart. So hopefully that's an encouragement to some of you that are having these troubles. Feel free to leave comments or ask questions. As I go through this, I'm learning more and more about the machine and where things are located and what circuits are on what card and that sort of thing. So I'm able to be some help maybe in troubleshooting. So feel free to ask some questions or comment. As always, if you like this stuff, subscribe, like, whatever, all of that. Anyway, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.